All right, so moving right along, let's talk about a movement called scholasticism, which I think, in terms of continuity and change, is a really interesting connection between the classical era and really the upcoming Renaissance era. So, the key figure to keep in mind for this movement was Thomas Aquinas. And what scholasticism ultimately was this attempt to reconcile old and new knowledge, right? So he was trying to take Aristotelian science and uh, other philosophic beliefs and ultimately combine it with new ideas, right? With deep Christianity. So that's what scholasticism is. Aquinas argued that faith was not endangered by logical thinking. So it's an interesting foreshadow to the Renaissance in the sense that one of the key new ideas to the Renaissance is questioning previously established ideas, questioning the universe, using evidence to prove things. So even though Thomas Aquinas was around in the 13th century, you can already see that that new type of thinking is coming. Aquinas' view opened up the way for secularism and Christian humanism in the Renaissance, as well as for later Enlightenment ideas of progress, reason, and natural law. So he's a really good figure to use for continuity and change. In terms of religious orders, when we're talking about a religious order, we're referring to a monastery or a convent, right? So a religious order is various groups of monks or nuns, and they're living in vowed communities. And they're parts of the Catholic Church. And what's interesting about religious orders, as I've already alluded to in previous videos, is that it's really the clergy that maintains literacy in medieval Europe. So they are key in these orders to advancing Europe's progress, or maybe in sometimes you could just say maintaining the status quo of their knowledge. So because of their literacy, they keep learning alive. They promote practical advice such as using better agricultural methods. So things like the three-field system are going to be a product to a certain extent of the knowledge preserved and advanced in religious orders. There were different orders. Examples are the Benedictines, the Franciscans, Dominicans, Knights Templar. And within the rules of the Catholic Church, they also follow their own unique regulations. And these orders combine clerical, missionary, and secular duties, sometimes all in one. So two interesting examples of that. An example of a military secular duty specifically would be the Knights Templar and the Teutonic Knights. So you can remember these orders and their connection with the military because they both have knights in their title. So the Knights Templar, they were founded during the Crusades, and they combined the functions of knights and monks together. And they were key in the Crusades. They fought to try to get the Holy Land from Muslims. And another thing that connects them more to the church, less to the military element, is that they also cared for the sick and injured, both in a medical sense, but also in a religious sense. The Teutonic Knights fought pagan Slavs near the Baltic Sea, so they were more northern. And they introduced Christian missions and churches in that area. So two good examples of connecting the religious and secular world if you talk about those two orders. A key example also of how learning is preserved, how it continues, how it develops, is of course in universities that are established in the medieval era in Europe. Some of the oldest ones, you have the Salerno Medical School in Italy, and this was completed in the 9th century, although it was a very long-lasting institution, still exists. But when it was originally founded, its teachings were mainly based on knowledge handed down from the ancient Greek times, so during the time of Hippocrates. They based most of their teachings on a Greek physician named Galen. You see him here. He lived in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and he lived in what is now present-day Turkey. And also there was other medical information shaping the Salerno University from the Arab world. So this is key because, as we've already discussed, it's a prosperous time for the Middle East during this historical period. And so it's due to their prosperity to a large extent that this medical scientific knowledge is preserved in Western Europe when it's in general experiencing a period of decay. Another medieval university established in Paris in the 12th century, University of Paris. What's interesting is when the university was first established, it was so small that students often shared the books while they were attending lectures. The two main subject areas were liberal arts or theology, so you do still see a close church connection there. And universities that were set up in medieval Europe established within the university, they set up colleges, which acted as boarding houses for scholars. And they were occasionally divided according to students' nationality or discipline. And when these colleges within the universities were founded, it was in a response to disputes between students and townspeople. Universities granted students licenses to teach after they completed years of study and passed an exam. Early schools founded in the UK, Cambridge and Oxford, obviously still very well known, they're also founded in the 12th century. So a lot of significant educational development even in the medieval era. And of course, that only expands in Western Europe once we get into the Renaissance. So for comparison, obviously key AP skill, just key general skill when we're studying history. If we're comparing, mainly focusing on the Abbasid dynasty and compare and contrast that to Western Europe. In terms of education, both East and West are interested in recording and preserving classical works from Greece and Rome. The Abbasids combined classical knowledge, though, with new developments coming from India as well as from other parts of the Islamic world. So that's a key distinction there. So if anything, once we reach the Renaissance, this increased knowledge from the East is going to add to Renaissance ideas. Western universities used Latin as the language of pedagogy, and they focused on liberal arts such as rhetoric, in addition to theological studies. And in Eastern universities, specifically the Abbasids, their main languages of study are Arabic and Persian. And another addition in their studies is new ideas in math and science. We've mentioned earlier the Arabic numeral system. Key to know that one. It actually originated, despite the name Arabic numerals, it originated in India. But is then extended to the Arab world and eventually to the West. And the Arabic numeral system is the same one that we use in our numeral system, 0 to 9 as the base. Arabic became the language of science for this medieval time period, which is key if we're thinking about the preservation of knowledge. In terms of medicine, medical advances were slow to arrive in Western Europe. So the best hospitals in the world in this time were in the Arabic-speaking world. One reason for the difference may have been due to religious sanctions. So the Muslim empires did autopsies and they conducted research with human cadavers. But in Europe, the church's influence forbade working on cadavers. So that was a major setback to medical knowledge in Western Europe. Also, there were key medical scholars that were coming from the Arabic world. Key one was, or beyond the Arabic world, just the Muslim world rather, because the key example I wanted to give was Avicenna, who lived in the 10th and 11th centuries. So he was a Persian scholar. He was actually known as the father of modern medicine, and he wrote a text called the Canon of Medicine, and for 600 years, this text served as a reference book for medical students and doctors. And advances of Southwest and East Asian civilizations were also ahead of those in medieval Europe. But the key thing is that when Europe caught up during the Renaissance, it was very, very quick to then catch up to this lack of knowledge that it had in the medieval era. Absorbing new goods and ideas would lead Europeans to vast exploration and expansion in the coming centuries using Asian technologies such as paper and agricultural tools.